Welcome, beloved friend. What you're about to listen is one of those rare testimonies that pierces through the noise of everyday life and strikes at the very core of what it means to search for truth. This is a story that challenges everything we think we know about faith, surrender, and the relentless pursuit of peace. As you journey through these words, I invite you to slow down. Let each moment settle into your heart. Feel the weight of the struggle, the breakthrough, and the undeniable transformation that can only come from an encounter with divine love. We would be honored to hear from you. Tell us where you're reading from and share how this testimony resonates with your own journey. Your thoughts, your questions, your reflections are not just comments in a void. They create ripples that reach others who are searching, struggling, and hoping for something more. They spark the kind of conversations that inspire faith, bring healing, and deepen our collective understanding of what it means to truly know God. This testimony stands as another powerful reminder of what happens when we commit ourselves to prayer and refuse to give up on those who need hope most. Every prayer you've lifted, every testimony you've read and shared, every word of encouragement you've spoken into this community, it all matters more than you know. This is the fruit of your faithfulness, the harvest of seeds planted in faith and watered with persistence. Together, we have stood beside new believers and longtime Christians facing unimaginable pressures in some of the world's most hostile environments. We've reached across borders through prayer, through genuine connection, and through the simple but profound act of showing up again and again, refusing to let distance or difficulty silence our support. As you read Mubarak's story, know that you have played a part in making testimonies like this possible. This is what happens when a community refuses to give up, refuses to stay silent, and refuses to forget those who need us most. My name is Mubarak Ibrahim. I was born in a small town called Zaka, situated just outside Amman in Jordan. The town itself was unremarkable to outsiders, but to those of us who grew up there, it was a world complete unto itself. Narrow streets wound between flat-roofed houses, and the call to prayer marked the rhythm of every day. The marketplace buzzed with vendors selling spices, bread, and fresh vegetables. Children played soccer in dusty lots while mothers watched from doorways, and men gathered in coffee shops to discuss politics and religion over small cups of thick, sweet coffee. My father was a respected teacher at the local mosque, a man whose name carried weight in our community. When he walked through the streets, people would stand a little straighter, greet him with extra warmth, and seek his counsel on matters both spiritual and practical. Everyone admired him for his knowledge of Islamic texts, his ability to recite lengthy passages from memory, and his reputation as a man of unwavering faith. To be his son was both an honor and a burden I carried from my earliest memories. Growing up, my greatest desire was to make my father proud. I watched the way people looked at him with respect and reverence, and I wanted desperately to be worthy of that same regard. So I followed every prayer with careful attention, observed every fast with determination, and memorized every rule with precision. I became known among the other children as serious beyond my years, the boy who never missed prayers and could recite verses that others struggled to remember. From my earliest childhood, I was taught that to question anything about God or our faith was not just unwise but dangerous. Doubt was presented as a gateway to destruction, a crack in the foundation that could bring everything crumbling down. So I learned to silence the small voice in my heart that sometimes wondered, that occasionally questioned, that dared to ask why when perhaps I should have simply accepted because. I obeyed. I performed. I presented the image everyone expected. But deep inside, beneath the layers of ritual and routine, I felt a heaviness I could never quite name. It was like carrying a stone in my chest, something solid and cold that never warmed no matter how many prayers I recited or how perfectly I followed the prescribed path. As a boy, I used to climb to the flat roof of our house in the late afternoon and watch the sunset paint the hills in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Those moments alone with the changing sky became sacred to me in a way I couldn't explain. I would ask myself questions I never dared speak aloud. Why did the beauty of creation move me to tears while the rituals that were supposed to connect me to the Creator left me feeling empty? Why, even when I prayed 5 times a day with my forehead pressed to the prayer mat, did my heart never feel the peace that was promised? Sometimes I would sit by my window long after the household had gone to sleep, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, and whisper to myself, maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I'm broken in some way others aren't. The thought terrified me because it suggested that the fault lay not in what I was doing but in who I was. If I followed all the rules and still felt this emptiness, what did that say about me? But I didn't dare speak to anyone about these internal struggles. How could I? Everyone expected me to be strong, to be faithful, to be like my father. My mother would beam with pride when visitors commented on my devotion. My teachers at the mosque would point to me as an example for other students. To admit my doubts would be to shatter the image everyone held of me, to disappoint people I loved, and to bring shame upon my family. So I learned to wear a mask. I became skilled at showing people what they wanted to see while hiding the turmoil that churned beneath the surface. I smiled when expected, spoke the right phrases at the right moments, and maintained the appearance of a young man perfectly at peace with his faith. But the mask grew heavier with each passing year. When I reached my late teenage years, I began studying more seriously at the mosque. I threw myself into religious texts with an intensity that impressed my teachers but worried my mother, who noticed I no longer played soccer with friends or seemed interested in the normal pursuits of young men my age. The teachers spoke frequently about heaven and hell, painting vivid pictures of eternal reward for the righteous and unimaginable punishment for those who failed to measure up. I listened carefully to every word, taking notes, memorizing key passages, determined to be among the righteous. But instead of the peace and assurance I sought, I began to feel a fear unlike anything I had experienced before. It was the kind of fear that settled into my bones and never left, a constant companion that shadowed my every action and thought. Even the smallest mistakes would send waves of anxiety through me. Had I performed my ablutions correctly before prayer? Had I maintained proper focus throughout? Or had my mind wandered? Had I been respectful enough in my speech? Had I avoided every possible sin in thought, word, and deed? The questions multiplied, and with them, the fear that I was never quite good enough, that God was keeping a record of every failure, and that the scale would ultimately tip against me. I tried harder to be good, to be perfect. I added extra prayers beyond the required 5. I fasted more frequently, even on days when it wasn't obligated. I spent longer hours at the mosque, reciting prayers until my voice grew hoarse. But the emptiness in my chest never went away. If anything, it grew stronger, more insistent, like a hollow space that no amount of religious activity could fill. Sometimes the emptiness would intensify so suddenly that I couldn't breathe properly. My chest would tighten, my heart would race, and I would have to excuse myself from wherever I was to find a quiet place to try to calm down. I started avoiding social situations, making excuses to stay home, spending more and more time alone in my room. My mother noticed that I smiled less, that I seemed to be withdrawing into myself, but when she asked if something was wrong, I always told her I was fine. Inside, I wasn't fine. I didn't know it then, but something in me was crying out for truth, not just religion. For connection, not just correct performance. For love, not just law. By the time I reached 21, my life had become increasingly isolated. I had stopped hanging out with the friends I'd grown up with, no longer joined in their conversations or accepted their invitations to gather. I spent most of my time alone, either in my room or wandering through quiet streets when the weight of being indoors became too much to bear. My father interpreted my behavior as a sign that I was becoming more serious about faith, more dedicated to spiritual pursuits. He felt proud, telling relatives and friends that his son was following faithfully in his footsteps, perhaps even surpassing him in devotion. But the truth was far different. I was profoundly confused, caught in a cycle of trying and failing, striving and falling short, performing and feeling nothing. I did everything that should have made me feel close to God. I prayed until my knees ached. I studied until my eyes burned. I fasted until my body weakened. Yet with each effort, I felt more distant, not closer. The harder I tried to earn peace, the more it eluded me. There were nights when sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed feeling my chest grow tight, as if invisible hands were squeezing the air from my lungs. A cold fear would cover me like a blanket, and I would get up and pace around my room, repeating prayers mechanically, hoping their familiar rhythm would somehow break through the darkness and bring relief. But they gave me no comfort. They were just words bouncing off the walls and falling to the floor. Sometimes I thought maybe I was being punished for something I didn't even know I had done. Maybe there was some hidden sin I had committed in ignorance, some offense against God that had closed the door between us. The not knowing was almost worse than the fear itself. One particularly difficult evening, I went out to walk and clear my head. The streets were quieter than usual, and I could hear the call to prayer echoing across the buildings with that haunting, beautiful sound that had marked every day of my life. People rushed toward the mosque, moving with purpose and belonging. But I stood still on the sidewalk, frozen, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that I didn't belong anywhere. The air felt heavy, thick with humidity and something else I couldn't name. My heart was full of questions I couldn't answer and didn't know how to ask. I felt like a stranger in the only world I had ever known, disconnected from the very traditions that were supposed to give my life meaning. When I got home, my father was sitting in his usual chair, reading. He looked up when I entered and immediately his face showed concern. "You look troubled, my son," he said gently. "What weighs on your heart?" I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to pour out all the confusion, the fear, the emptiness, the desperate longing for something I couldn't name. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I tell this man I respected and loved that everything he had taught me, everything he believed and lived for, had failed to bring me peace? "I'm just tired, Father," I said, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. He smiled and reached out to touch my shoulder. "Pray more, my son. Prayer cures everything. Increase your devotion and you will find what you seek." I nodded, thanked him, and went to my room. His words, meant to comfort and guide, felt like stones being added to the weight I already carried. I prayed that night again, going through the motions with mechanical precision. But it felt like my words were bouncing back from the ceiling, never reaching beyond the confines of my small room. I started to wonder if God even heard me. Or worse, if he heard but chose not to answer. It happened on a night I will never forget, in June of 2017. The date is burned into my memory like a brand, June 14th, just past midnight. Everyone else in the house was asleep. The neighborhood was silent except for the occasional barking of distant dogs and the hum of a refrigerator downstairs. I was sitting on my bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion. My heart was beating faster than normal, a rapid rhythm that seemed to have no external cause. Sweat covered my face even though the night air coming through my window was cool. My hands trembled slightly, and I felt a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. I tried to stand up, thinking maybe walking around would help, but my legs gave out and I fell to the floor. The impact should have hurt, but I barely felt it. Everything around me began to turn dark, not the natural darkness of a room at night, but something deeper, more complete, more terrifying. At first, I thought maybe I was having some kind of medical emergency, perhaps a seizure or a heart attack. But then I realized this was something else entirely. The darkness was too thick, too present, too purposeful to be merely physical. It had weight and texture, pressing against me from all sides. I could hear faint sounds far away, indistinct at first but gradually becoming clearer. People crying, others screaming in agony, voices calling out in desperation. The sound sent chills through my entire body. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't see where to go. The darkness was absolute, disorienting, suffocating. My legs felt weak, as if the ground beneath me was unstable. Then I began to feel something pulling me downward, a force that seemed to want to drag me deeper into the darkness. It was like the earth itself was opening up, creating a void that wanted to swallow me whole. Terror filled every cell of my body. I tried to cry out for God to help me, opening my mouth to scream prayers, but no sound came out. My voice was gone, stolen by the darkness. I frantically tried to remember every prayer I had learned since childhood, every verse I had memorized, every formula for calling upon divine help. But my mind was blank, wiped clean by fear. The sound of cries grew louder, more insistent. I felt as if I was being surrounded by things I couldn't see but could sense moving around me, dark presences that radiated hostility and despair. My whole body shook uncontrollably. I had never known fear like this, a fear so complete it seemed to be all that existed. Then, from somewhere far away, I saw a soft light. At first, it was just a pinpoint, barely visible against the overwhelming darkness. But it began to grow, spreading outward, pushing back the shadows. The light was unlike anything I had ever seen, not harsh or blinding, but warm and welcoming, pure and beautiful beyond description. The dark shapes around me began to fade, retreating from the advancing light like shadows fleeing the dawn. I fell to my knees, covering my face with my hands. Even with my eyes closed, the light was so strong I could see it through my eyelids. And there, in that light, I felt the presence of someone. Not something abstract or distant, but someone real, personal, present. A peace I had never known filled the air, so tangible I could almost feel it like a physical substance. It was the opposite of everything I had been feeling. Where there had been fear, now there was comfort. Where there had been emptiness, now there was fullness. Where there had been despair, now there was hope. I didn't hear a voice from outside myself, with my physical ears. It was different from that. The communication came from within, as if words were being written directly on my heart. The presence revealed to me that he had heard my cry, that he had seen my pain, that he had witnessed every struggle and every tear. He had come to give me the peace I had been desperately seeking. The peace that filled that place was beyond anything words could capture. Every language I knew suddenly seemed inadequate to describe what I was experiencing. I no longer felt fear. It had been completely replaced by a warmth that seemed to cover me like a blanket after years of being cold. It was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering, like being embraced by someone who knew everything about me and loved me anyway. I wanted to stay there forever. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. I didn't know if seconds or hours were passing. All I knew was that I never wanted this feeling to end. The presence let me know that he had been watching me all my life. Even when I thought I was completely alone, drowning in my struggles and doubts, he had been there. To prove this, he showed me moments from my past, like watching scenes from a film. I saw myself as a young boy, crying quietly in my room after a particularly difficult day. I saw myself as a teenager, kneeling in prayer but feeling nothing. I saw myself standing on that street corner just days earlier, feeling like I belonged nowhere. But in each scene, I now saw what I hadn't seen before, a presence with me. Not distant or disinterested, but close and compassionate. Even in my loneliest moments, I had never truly been alone. He had been there, waiting for me to call on him truly, to seek not just correct performance but genuine connection. It felt as if love itself had taken form and was speaking directly to me. This was not the distant, stern, record-keeping deity I had imagined. This was someone who genuinely cared, who had been pursuing me even when I didn't know I was being pursued, who wanted relationship more than ritual. Then he revealed something painful but necessary. I saw the darkness I had been trapped in, not just in that terrifying moment but throughout my life. The fear that had haunted me, the guilt that had weighed me down, the emptiness that no amount of religious activity could fill. He let me understand that I could never escape it through my own strength or effort. No matter how many prayers I recited or how perfectly I followed the rules, I could never earn my way out of that darkness. Only his mercy could free me. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to say something in response, but I couldn't find words. My heart was too full, overwhelmed by emotions I had never experienced. I felt tears running down my face, but they were different from any tears I had cried before. They were not tears of fear or frustration or despair. They were tears of relief, of release, of something breaking free inside me. I knew with absolute certainty that I was standing before someone holy, someone pure, someone who truly knew me, every thought, every doubt, every hidden struggle, and accepted me completely. The judgment I had feared all my life was nowhere to be found. There was only love. He let me know that his name was Jesus and that he had come to show me the way of peace. In that moment, every question I had ever asked, every doubt I had ever harbored, every confusion I had ever felt simply dissolved. I didn't argue. I didn't analyze. I didn't try to reconcile this with everything I had been taught. I simply believed, with a certainty deeper than any intellectual understanding. Suddenly, the light began to fade and the familiar darkness of my room gradually returned. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath like someone who had been underwater and had just broken the surface. My lungs burned as I gulped air. My mother was beside me, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she gripped my arm. "Mubarak, Mubarak," she was saying, her voice high with panic. "Can you hear me? Oh God, can you hear me?" She told me later that she had been awakened by a loud noise, like something heavy falling. She had rushed to my room and found me lying on the floor, completely unresponsive. She had been trying to wake me for several minutes, shaking me and calling my name, terrified that I was dying or already dead. I sat up slowly, my whole body still trembling. I looked around my room, the familiar walls, my desk with books stacked on it, the window showing the dark sky outside, but everything seemed different somehow. The same physical space, but changed in a way I couldn't quite explain. For a long time, I just stared at the wall, unable to process what had happened or form coherent thoughts. But I could still feel it, a warmth in my chest where the cold stone of fear and emptiness had been. The absence of the burden I had carried for so long was almost as tangible as the burden itself had been. My mother held my hand tightly, searching my face with worried eyes. "What happened?" she asked. "Are you ill? Should I call a doctor? You scared me so terribly." All I could say was, "I saw light, Mama. I saw light." She didn't understand, of course. She thought I had experienced some kind of strange dream or perhaps a medical event that had caused hallucinations. She made me lie back down, brought me water, and sat with me until I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. But I knew what I had experienced was real. More real, in fact, than anything else I had ever experienced. The memory didn't fade or become uncertain as dreams do. Every detail remained vivid and present. The next day, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window. The morning call to prayer was echoing across the neighborhood as it had every morning of my life. But everything looked different. The sky seemed clearer, painted in shades of blue I had never noticed before. The air felt lighter somehow, easier to breathe. Even ordinary sounds, birds singing, distant traffic, someone calling to a neighbor, seemed more vivid and alive. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt peace. Not the absence of problems or difficulties, but a genuine inner calm that wasn't dependent on circumstances. The stone that had weighed down my chest was gone. The fear that had shadowed my every moment had lifted. I felt, quite simply, free. I spent hours that day sitting quietly in my room, thinking about what had happened. I couldn't stop remembering the light, the presence, the overwhelming sense of being known and loved. I tried to reconcile this experience with everything I had been taught, but I found that I didn't want to. For once, I wasn't interested in fitting something into a predetermined theological framework. I just wanted to hold on to the truth I had encountered. Days passed, and the reality of what had happened didn't fade. I began to feel a strong desire to know more about Jesus. The name that had been revealed to me carried a power I wanted to understand. But I couldn't ask anyone openly. In my community, to express interest in Jesus beyond acknowledging him as a prophet would raise immediate suspicion and concern. So I began searching secretly, using my phone late at night when everyone else was asleep. I found the Bible online and started reading, beginning with the book of John as something drew me to start there. The words felt alive, like someone was speaking directly to me through them. Verses seemed to glow with meaning, addressing questions I had carried for years. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. When I read those words, I wept because I had seen that light. I had experienced exactly what these ancient words described. I read about Jesus speaking to people who were burdened and heavy-laden, offering them rest. I read about him touching the untouchable, healing the sick, forgiving the guilty, seeking out the lost. Every story revealed someone completely different from the distant, harsh deity I had imagined. This was someone who pursued the broken, who reached out to those who had given up, who offered grace instead of condemnation. A few weeks passed. I continued my secret reading and prayer, feeling my understanding grow with each day. But keeping this to myself became increasingly difficult. The change in me was too significant to hide completely. My mother noticed that something had shifted, though she couldn't identify what. My father observed that I seemed lighter somehow, less burdened, though he assumed his counsel about increased prayer had finally taken effect. One evening during dinner, the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading finally arrived. My father had been watching me throughout the meal, and as we finished eating, he set down his cup and looked at me directly. "Mubarak," he said, his voice serious but not unkind. "You have become very quiet and different these past weeks. Your mother and I have noticed. There is something on your mind. What is it?" My heart began to beat faster. I hadn't planned this moment. I wasn't prepared. But something inside me knew it was time. I couldn't continue living a double life, hiding the most important thing that had ever happened to me. "Father," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "something happened to me. Something I need to tell you about." His expression became more alert. My mother set down the dish she was holding and came to sit at the table, sensing this was important. I told them everything. About the years of emptiness despite all my efforts. About the night I fell and experienced the darkness. About the light that came and the presence I encountered there. About how Jesus had revealed himself to me and given me the peace I had sought all my life. About how I had been reading the Bible and finding truth in his words. As I spoke, my father's face changed. What started as concern shifted to confusion, then to anger. The red flush started at his neck and rose to his face. His hands, resting on the table, slowly formed into fists. "Stop," he said sharply. "Stop this nonsense now." But I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. Years of holding everything inside had ended, and I needed him to understand, needed him to see what I had seen. My mother began to cry, bringing her hands to her face. "No, no, no," she kept repeating. "Not my son. Please, not my son." "You are being deceived," my father said, his voice rising. "This is the work of Satan, can't you see? You have opened yourself to evil influences through your doubt and questioning. This is why I have always taught you not to question. It wasn't evil, Father, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. It was the opposite of evil. It was the most pure, most holy thing I have ever experienced. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace. Peace, he shouted, standing abruptly and pushing his chair back. You call this peace? Destroying your family? Bringing shame upon us? Rejecting everything we have taught you? I tried to explain further, tried to help him see that this wasn't about rejecting them or our family, but about following truth wherever it led. But the more I spoke, the angrier he became. My mother's crying grew louder. The scene I had feared for weeks was unfolding worse than I had imagined. Finally, my father looked at me with eyes I had never seen before, cold, distant, as if he was looking at a stranger. You have a choice, he said, his voice now quiet but harder than steel. You can recant this foolishness, return to your faith, and we will forget this happened. Or you must leave this house. I will not have someone who has abandoned Islam living under my roof and poisoning the rest of the family. The ultimatum hung in the air. My mother looked at me pleadingly, begging me with her eyes to take it back, to say I had made a mistake, to choose family over this new path. I felt torn in two. I loved my parents. This was the only home I had ever known. These were the people who had raised me, cared for me, wanted the best for me. But I also knew I couldn't deny what had happened. I couldn't unknow what I now knew or unfeel what I had felt. I'm sorry, Father, I said quietly, tears now running down my own face. I can't deny what I experienced. I can't go back to living in darkness when I have seen light. He turned away from me. Then you must leave. Tonight. That night, I packed a small bag with a few clothes, my phone, the little money I had saved, and a note with the website where I had been reading the Bible. The house was completely silent except for my mother's muffled crying from their bedroom. I wanted to go to her, to hold her one more time, to reassure her somehow. But I knew it would only make things harder. I left a note on my bed. Mama, Baba, I love you both more than words can say. I am not abandoning you. I am following truth. One day, I pray you will understand. Please know that I carry you in my heart always. Your son, Mubarak. I slipped out of the house just after midnight, closing the door as quietly as possible. The streets were empty and dark. I started walking without a clear destination, just moving forward because standing still felt impossible. The weight of what had just happened began to settle on me. I was alone in a way I had never been before. I had no plan, no place to go, no idea what tomorrow would bring. Any rational assessment of my situation would have suggested I had made a terrible mistake. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. The same peace I had felt in the light was still with me, like a constant companion. I could almost feel it as a presence walking beside me through the dark streets. I was alone, but not alone. I walked until morning light began to paint the sky pink and gold. I found myself in a park near the edge of town and sat on a bench, exhausted. Around me, the city was beginning to wake up. People heading to work, shopkeepers opening their stores, children walking to school. Normal life continuing as if my entire world hadn't just been turned upside down. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Tariq, a friend from school I hadn't seen much in recent years. Are you awake? I need help. It's urgent. Tariq responded quickly and met me at a coffee shop an hour later. When he saw my face, he knew immediately that something serious had happened. I told him a simplified version, that I'd had a disagreement with my father and needed a place to stay for a while. He didn't ask too many questions, just offered me his couch. For the next few weeks, I stayed with Tariq in his small apartment. He worked long hours at a construction company, so I had the days mostly to myself. I spent that time reading more of the Bible and praying quietly, deepening my understanding of this new faith I had embraced. Each page taught me something new about love, forgiveness, grace, and truth. I began to realize that following Jesus was not just about believing certain things or having a transformative experience. It was about living differently, seeing the world through different eyes, treating people with the kind of unconditional love he had shown me. One afternoon, while walking through the city trying to clear my head, I stopped at a small bookstore I had never noticed before. It was tucked away on a quiet street, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Something drew me inside. The shop was dimly lit, packed with books on shelves that reached nearly to the ceiling. I was browsing when I realized I was holding a Bible, a physical copy I had picked up without thinking. The owner, A man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner noticed what I was holding. He approached carefully, lowering his voice. "Where did you get that interest?" he asked in barely more than a whisper. I hesitated. This could be a trap. But something in his eyes, a certain gentleness and lack of judgment, told me I could trust him. "I've been reading it," I said simply. "It has changed my life." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "There are others," he said quietly. "Others who have also found this path. Would you like to meet them?" My heart leaped. I had felt so alone in this journey, convinced I was the only one in this entire city who had experienced what I had experienced. The possibility that there were others, people who would understand, who could help me navigate this new reality, felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning man. "Yes," I said. "Please, yes." He wrote an address on a small piece of paper and handed it to me. "Saturday evening, after sunset. Don't tell anyone else. Be careful." That Saturday, I followed the address to a small house on the edge of town, in a neighborhood I had never visited before. I knocked on the door with trembling hands, half afraid of what I might find, half desperate for connection. A woman answered, looked at me carefully, then smiled warmly. "You're new," she said. "Come in. You're safe here." Inside, there were 6 people gathered in a modest living room. 3 men, 3 women, ranging from their early 20s to their 50s. They welcomed me like family, offering me tea and making space for me to sit among them. We sat together, spoke in careful whispers despite being behind closed doors, and read from the Bible. They told me their stories, how they had come to know Jesus. Some through dreams like mine, others through reading his words, still others through meeting missionaries or other believers. Each story was unique, but the peace in their eyes was identical to what I felt in my own heart. For the first time since leaving my family's house, I didn't feel alone. These people understood. They had walked the same difficult path, made the same costly choice, experienced the same transformation. "You will face hardship," one of the older men told me that evening, a gentle soul named Omar who had been following Jesus for over a decade. "Following Jesus here is not easy. You may lose more than you have already lost. But I promise you this, he will never leave you. The peace he gives is worth any price." Those words proved prophetic. We met secretly every week after that, rotating between different houses to avoid drawing attention. We sang worship songs softly so neighbors wouldn't hear. We prayed for each other, for our families, for others who were searching. We studied the Bible together, helping each other understand and grow. Those quiet meetings became the foundation of my new life. My faith grew deeper with each gathering. My love for Jesus grew stronger. I learned that being a believer was not about escaping difficulty or having an easy life. It was about finding hope and strength through difficulty, about discovering that you're never alone even in the hardest moments. But life outside those meetings was becoming more challenging. People in my neighborhood had noticed my absence from the mosque. Whispers began to circulate. Some said I had become mentally unstable. Others suggested I had fallen in with bad influences. A few suspected the truth. I lost my job at a local shop when the owner heard rumors about my changed beliefs. "I can't have someone like that working here," he told me, not even meeting my eyes. "It's bad for business." Friends I had known since childhood stopped responding to my messages. When I would see them on the street, they would cross to the other side or suddenly become very interested in their phones. The isolation was painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, 2 men I didn't recognize came to Tariq's apartment. They questioned me aggressively, asking if it was true that I had abandoned Islam and was following Jesus. Their tone made it clear this wasn't a friendly inquiry. I didn't deny it. I had tried hiding and pretending, and I found I couldn't do it anymore. "I believe in Jesus," I said simply. "He revealed himself to me, and I cannot deny that truth." Their faces grew cold, expressions hardening like stone. One of them leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're saying. This is not a game. You need to stop this immediately, or you will face serious trouble." "I understand," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "But I cannot go back. I have found peace, and I will not trade it for anything." They exchanged glances, then stood to leave. At the door, one turned back. "You've been warned," he said. "Don't say we didn't give you a chance." That night, I couldn't sleep, but I wasn't overcome with fear. I lay awake remembering the light, remembering the presence, remembering the love that had found me in my darkest moment. I knew with certainty that I could never go back to the darkness, no matter what it cost me. Things became progressively harder after that visit. Tariq began to feel pressure from his own family about harboring me. Though he never said so directly, I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he would glance nervously out the window, the tension in his shoulders when there was a knock at the door. I lost another job opportunity when someone from the neighborhood recognized me during an interview and pulled the employer aside. I watched through the window as they spoke, saw the employer's expression change, and knew before he came back that the position was no longer available. Some of my former friends not only avoided me but began spreading stories about me, that I had lost my mind, that I was dangerous, that I was being paid by foreigners to betray our community. The lies hurt more than the direct rejection. But even in these hardest days, the peace never left me. It was the strangest thing. Externally, my life was falling apart, but internally, I felt more whole than I ever had. Sometimes when I prayed, I would feel that same presence near me, as real and tangible as it had been that night in June. It was like a whisper in my heart, reminding me, I am with you. You are not forgotten. This suffering is not without purpose. Our small group of believers became my lifeline during this time. They understood what I was going through because they had walked similar paths. We supported each other practically, sharing what little money we had, helping each other find work, providing shelter when needed. But more importantly, we reminded each other of why we had chosen this path, why following Jesus was worth every sacrifice. One evening during our gathering, a woman named Layla shared her testimony. She had been a believer for 3 years and had lost contact with her entire family. Some days are so hard I wonder if I can continue, she said, tears streaming down her face. But then I remember what Jesus said. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He never promised it would be easy. He promised he would be with us. And he has been. Every single day, even when I couldn't feel him, he was there. Her words struck deep in my heart. I realized that I had been blessed beyond measure. Yes, I had lost my family and my old life. But I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had found truth, found peace, found a love that would never leave me. A few months into my new life as a believer, something unexpected happened. Through a connection one of our group members had with a humanitarian organization, I was introduced to some missionaries who worked with refugees and persecuted believers in the region. They were quiet, careful people who understood the dangers we faced. After several conversations and meetings, they approached me with an opportunity. We can help you travel to another country, they explained. Somewhere you can live more freely, where you can practice your faith openly without fear. It's not an easy process, and it will mean leaving everything familiar behind. But it's a chance for a new beginning. The decision tore at my heart. Part of me desperately wanted to stay, to remain close to my family even if I couldn't see them, to hold on to some connection to the land where I was born. But another part of me knew that staying was becoming increasingly dangerous, not just for me but potentially for others around me. I spent a week in prayer, seeking guidance. During that time, I felt a clear sense that this door was opening for a reason. Perhaps God had more for me to do, more people for me to reach, more of his story to tell. Perhaps he was making a way where there seemed to be no way. I decided to go. The night before I left, I did something risky. I went back to my neighborhood, staying in the shadows, and stood across the street from my family's house. Lights were on in the living room, and through the window I could see movement. My mother passing by, my father sitting in his chair. I stood there for a long time, memorizing every detail. The blue door I had walked through thousands of times. The jasmine plant my mother tended in the front courtyard. The crooked shutter on my bedroom window that my father had always meant to fix but never got around to. I wanted so badly to knock on that door, to embrace my mother one more time, to tell my father that I still loved him despite everything. But I knew it would only bring more pain, more conflict, perhaps even put them in a difficult position with the community. Instead, I prayed. Standing in those shadows, I prayed for them with an intensity one had never known before. I prayed that God would soften their hearts, that someday they would understand, that they too might encounter the light I had seen. I prayed for their health, their happiness, their peace. I prayed that they would know, somehow, that I had never stopped loving them. As I turned to walk away, I whispered, "Until we meet again. In this life or the next." The journey to Canada was long and complicated, involving multiple flights, waiting in airports, processing through immigration systems designed to be thorough and often impersonal. But throughout it all, I carried that peace with me like a treasured possession. As the plane took off on the final leg of the journey, I looked down at the city lights spreading below like a constellation of earthbound stars. I thought about everyone I was leaving behind, my family, my friends, the believers in our small group who had become my spiritual family, the familiar streets and sounds and smells of the only home I had ever known. Tears ran down my face, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of gratitude mixed with grief, hope mixed with sadness, the complex emotions of someone leaving one chapter of life and stepping into a completely unknown next chapter. I whispered a prayer, watching the lights grow smaller and smaller until clouds obscured them. Father, I trust you with all of this. I trust you with my family, with my future, with every uncertainty ahead. Thank you for the light. Thank you for never giving up on me. Use my story, use my life, use everything I've been through for your purposes. And please, someday, let my family see what I have seen. I arrived in Canada in February, in the middle of winter. I had never experienced cold like that, the kind that bites at exposed skin and makes your breath visible in the air. Everything was foreign and overwhelming. The language, though I had studied some English, was spoken so quickly and with such unfamiliar accents that I struggled to understand. The customs, the food, the way people interacted, it was all different from everything I had known. I was placed in a small town near Toronto through a refugee resettlement program. The organization that had helped me travel connected me with a local church that had agreed to sponsor me and help me establish a new life. When I walked into that church for the first time, I was nervous. Would they accept me? Would they understand my journey? Would I belong here? What I found overwhelmed me. The people welcomed me with open arms, not as a project or a charity case, but as a brother. They helped me find a small apartment, donated furniture and household items, helped me navigate the confusing systems of getting identification and documentation. But more than the practical help, they gave me something I desperately needed. They gave me a community. I started working at a local grocery store, stocking shelves and learning to interact with customers despite my limited English. The work was humble, far removed from the education and aspirations I had once held, but I approached it with gratitude. I was free. I could pray openly. I could read my Bible on my lunch break without fear. I could go to church on Sunday and sing worship songs without whispering. These simple freedoms, which the people around me took for granted, felt like precious gifts to me. Before I continue with the rest of my story, I want to pause and speak directly to you, the person reading these words. If you haven't subscribed to this channel or followed this community yet, I want to invite you to be part of this journey. This isn't about numbers or statistics. It's about building a genuine community of people who care about real testimonies, about authentic struggles, about voices that challenge us to think deeper and live with greater clarity and purpose. As you read this testimony of transformation, I want to invite you to be part of the conversation. Share in the comments where you're reading from and what stands out to you in this journey. Your thoughts and reflections aren't just words on a screen. They help shape a genuine dialogue around experiences that have the power to change lives. They encourage others who might be struggling with similar questions, facing similar darkness, searching for similar light. When you share your location, your reactions, your own story, you're creating ripples that extend far beyond what you might imagine. Someone reading your comment might be encouraged to keep searching. Someone might see their own struggles reflected in your words and feel less alone. Someone might be inspired to take the next step in their own journey toward truth. This is how communities of faith are built, not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of showing up, sharing honestly, and supporting one another through the journey. Life in Canada slowly became more familiar. I improved my English through classes offered by the settlement agency and through countless hours of watching television with subtitles, reading newspapers, and practicing with patient friends from church. The language that had once seemed impossible gradually began to make sense, like a puzzle whose pieces were finally clicking into place. I spent my evenings helping at the church in various ways, setting up chairs for services, helping with the youth group, assisting with community dinners. Every opportunity to serve felt like a privilege. I was no longer hiding, no longer pretending, no longer living in fear. I could openly be who I had become, and that freedom was intoxicating. But I also wrestled with questions. Why had I been given this opportunity when so many other believers remained in danger? What was I supposed to do with this new life? How could I make my suffering, my loss, my journey count for something more than just my own survival? One evening, a pastor at the church asked if I would be willing to share my testimony during a Sunday service. The thought terrified me. My English was still imperfect, and I worried about speaking in front of so many people. But something in me knew this was part of why I had been brought here. The following Sunday, I stood before the congregation and told my story. I told them about growing up in Jordan, about the emptiness that no amount of religious devotion could fill, about the night I encountered darkness and then light, about Jesus revealing himself to me, about losing my family, about the small community of believers who had sustained me, about the journey that had brought me to this moment. As I spoke, I watched faces in the audience. Some were crying. Others sat with expressions of wonder. A few nodded knowingly, as if recognizing something in my story that resonated with their own journey. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment, and then people began to applaud, not for me, but for what God had done. After the service, people came up to me one by one. Many thanked me for sharing. Some asked questions. But one conversation stood out. A young man, probably in his early 20s, approached with tears in his eyes. "I've been running from God," he said quietly. "I've been filling my life with everything except what really matters, and I've felt so empty. But hearing your story, hearing what you gave up to follow Jesus, it makes me realize I've been taking everything for granted. Thank you. You've helped me see what's really important." In that moment, I understood. This was why I was here. Not just to survive, not just to find safety for myself, but to be a voice for those who couldn't speak, to share the light I had found with others who were still searching in darkness. Now, several years into this new life, I've settled into a rhythm that feels both stable and purposeful. I still work at the grocery store, though I've been promoted to a management position. I spend my evenings and weekends involved in church activities, helping with refugee resettlement efforts, and mentoring others who have come from similar backgrounds. Every morning when I wake up, before I do anything else, I spend time in prayer and Bible reading. It's become the anchor of my day, the practice that reminds me of where I've come from and who has brought me here. When I read passages about God's faithfulness, about his relentless pursuit of those who are lost, about his willingness to meet us in our darkest moments, I don't just read them as ancient stories. I read them as my own testimony. I often think about my family. I pray for them every single day, without exception. I wonder if my mother still cries sometimes, if my father ever thinks about me, if they tell themselves stories about what went wrong, or if they've come to any kind of peace with my choices. Through some indirect connections, I've learned that they are both healthy, which brings me comfort even as it intensifies the ache of separation. I've written letters that I've never sent, emails that I've composed and then deleted. I want to reach out, to bridge the gap, but I also know that any contact from me could bring them trouble or pain. So I wait, and I pray, and I trust that God sees what I cannot see, knows what I cannot know, and is working in ways beyond my understanding. Sometimes I share my story with others who are searching for peace. Many of them come from backgrounds similar to mine, people who have followed all the rules and performed all the rituals but still feel empty inside. When they hear my testimony, many of them cry. Some tell me they felt the same confusion, the same fear, the same desperate longing for something more. To them, I say what I wish someone had told me years ago. Religion without love cannot fill the human heart. You can follow every rule perfectly and still be empty inside, because what your soul truly craves is not correct performance but genuine connection with the one who made you. Jesus doesn't just change your beliefs or your religious affiliation. He changes your life from the inside out. He fills the empty places. He replaces fear with peace. He gives you a reason to wake up in the morning that goes deeper than duty or obligation. I've come to understand that my story is not unique. Throughout history and across the globe, countless people have encountered Jesus in unexpected ways, through visions, through dreams, through the testimony of others, through reading his words. Some have paid a far higher price than I have. Some have been imprisoned, tortured, killed for their faith. When I think about them, I'm humbled by my own relatively comfortable situation. But I've also learned that every story matters, including mine. Every testimony of transformation is a light shining in darkness, a beacon for others who are lost and searching. When I share what happened to me, I'm not drawing attention to myself. I'm pointing to the one who found me, who pursued me, who refused to let me remain in darkness despite my years of trying to earn my way to him. I've learned to forgive those who rejected me, who spread lies about me, who wanted to harm me. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the hurt wasn't real. It means choosing not to let bitterness take root in my heart, choosing to release the desire for revenge or vindication, choosing to trust that God sees and will ultimately make all things right. I've learned to be grateful for the difficult journey. I wouldn't have chosen the path I walked, The years of emptiness, the terrifying encounter with darkness, the loss of family, the rejection and hardship. But I also wouldn't trade what I've gained for anything. The peace I now carry is worth more than comfort. The truth I've discovered is worth more than acceptance. The relationship I have with Jesus is worth more than any earthly treasure. Every time I remember that night in June 2017, I still feel the warmth of the light. The memory hasn't faded or become less vivid with time. If anything, it grows more precious as I understand more fully what happened to me. I wasn't just saved from darkness. I was invited into light. I wasn't just forgiven. I was embraced. I wasn't just given information about God. I was introduced to Him personally. If you have read this far, if my story has touched something in your heart, I want to tell you a few things that I've learned on this journey. Never take your relationship with God lightly. Knowing Jesus is not just about saying you believe or performing religious duties. It's about walking with Him every single day, talking to Him constantly, allowing His presence to transform how you think, speak, and act. It's about pursuing Him as passionately as He pursues you. Life will not always be easy. Following Jesus did not solve all my problems. In some ways, it created new challenges. But He never promised an easy life. He promised He would never leave us. And He hasn't. In my darkest moments, His presence has been more real and more sustaining than any comfort this world could offer. The Bible is not just a book. It is a light for your path, a source of wisdom, a means through which God speaks. When you feel lost, open it and you will find direction. When you feel weak, read it and you will find strength. When you doubt, immerse yourself in it and you will find truth. Treat it as the precious gift it is. Love one another, especially those who hurt you. This is perhaps the hardest teaching of Jesus, but also the most powerful. Forgive those who betray you, who reject you, who persecute you. Don't allow anger or bitterness or pride to take root in your heart. The world is full of pain, but love is stronger than hate. When you love others, really love them, with the kind of selfless love Jesus showed, you reveal to them who He truly is. Do not be afraid of the cost of following Christ. Yes, it may cost you relationships. It may cost you comfort, security, reputation. It may cost you everything you thought was important. But what you gain is infinitely greater than what you lose. Every sacrifice you make for Him is never wasted. The peace He gives, the purpose He provides, the eternal life He promises, these are worth more than anything this world can offer. Never stop praying for those you love. Even when it seems hopeless, even when years pass without change, never stop lifting them up before God. Prayer is powerful beyond our understanding. The prayers I've prayed for my family, day after day, year after year, I trust that God is honoring them in ways I cannot yet see. Share your story. Your testimony, whatever it is, has power. When you tell others what God has done in your life, you're not just sharing information. You're shining light into darkness. You're giving hope to the hopeless. You're showing others that transformation is possible, that God still moves, that no one is beyond the reach of His love. I am Mubarak Ibrahim. Once lost in darkness, now living in light. Once burdened by fear and emptiness, now filled with peace and purpose. Once trapped by religion, now freed by relationship. If Jesus could find me in my darkest moment, if He could pursue me through years of emptiness and confusion, if He could reveal Himself to me in such a powerful way, then He can reach anyone. No one is too far gone. No one is too broken. No one is beyond the reach of His love. If you're reading these words and you feel that same emptiness I once felt, that same longing for peace, that same sense that there must be something more, I want you to know that you're not imagining it. That longing in your heart is real, and it's pointing you toward the one who can truly satisfy it. Don't settle for religion when you can have relationship. Don't settle for rules when you can have grace. Don't settle for fear when you can have peace. Don't settle for darkness when light is calling your name. Hold on to your faith with everything you have. Walk in love, even when it's costly. Let His light shine through you to others who are still searching. And never forget that the God who made you, who knows you completely, who sees every struggle and hears every cry, He loves you more than you can possibly imagine. This is my testimony. This is my story. But it's really His story. The story of what happens when divine love pursues a human heart, when heaven breaks through into our darkness, when grace does what human effort never could. May you find what I found. May you experience what I experienced. May you come to know Jesus not just as a name or a historical figure or a religious concept, but as the living presence who changes everything. From Zaka to Toronto, from darkness to light, from emptiness to fullness, This is what Jesus has done for me. And this is what he longs to do for you. Thank you for taking the time to read this testimony. If it has impacted you in any way, please share it with others who might need to hear this message. And please, leave a comment telling us where you're from and how this story has spoken to your heart. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter.